Last week I had the opportunity to interview both Chris Pacia and Josh Ellithorp, both of which who've had enormous contributions to the Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash space over the past couple years. We talk about their new implementation of Bitcoin Cash, BCHD. We talk about privacy, CashShuffle, and just Bitcoin Cash's future in general. Um, Now, the original interview was planned to be around 45 minutes, and I tried to cut it back to that, but in the end, I just couldn't do it. They both get into some really great stuff, and so just bear with me for the full hour and 45 minutes, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. First, just kind of like introduce yourselves, talk about how y'all got in the space a little bit, what are y'all doing at the moment, and just kind of go from there.
All right, so I'm Josh Ellithorp, and I've been in the BCH community since kind of the beginning of the fork, and I work on a lot of just like small projects in the space. I've been working with Chris, who on BCHD and BCH Wallet. I haven't spent that much time in the last month on that. I've been focused on CashShuffle, which is nearing release and trying to bring better privacy solutions to Bitcoin Cash. I also have been working with Jonathan Silverblood on some of the cash account pieces, trying to bring nickname services to wallets, and just trying to figure out the best way to provide a better user experience to new users into crypto and really get BCH adoption to a further place.
So I'm Chris Pacia. I've been in the Bitcoin since probably early 2012. I was involved in BCH kind of right from the beginning. We have a wallet that I wrote for OpenBazaar for BTC, and I think maybe the day after the fork or something, I was already making commits to port it over to BCH. So I work on OpenBazaar. That's my full-time job. And then, just last year, I kind of forked the BTCD full node implementation for BCH, and that's become BCHD. And then I work a little bit on that in my spare time too.
Right. Yeah, I saw BCHD when y'all released the roadmap. And when I saw it, it was just immediately like, whoa, this is different than what we've seen so far. Because I kind of feel like whenever they make their own node implementation, it's either to, tweak slight things or maybe do a little bit of research. But BCHD seems to be like the first implementation to really take advantage of going on a different roadmap. Not as in splitting off things that aren't interoperable, but just going in a different direction. It really seems like BCHD is focusing more on privacy than anything else.
So, I mean, there's definitely some advantages to having a different code base. Also, a code base that's not so heavily relied upon, particularly for mining, like Bitcoin ABC does, because that's particularly used for mining. They have to be more careful with everything they do, and they can't kind of write code and iterate fast like you normally would. And also, I don't think C++, in particular the Satoshi code base, lends itself that well to just testing out new things and experimenting, whereas I think the Go code base does. And so I think that's kind of a big advantage of it. And it's a very well-written code base too. I think most of it was probably written by, I believe, Dave Collins. And he did really an amazing job on it. I mean, I'm not kidding when I say this. It's probably one of the best written Go projects I've seen. And I've read a lot of Go code for a lot of different projects. And this is really, really well laid out, well architected, well written code. And so, yeah, it's a nice foundation to be able to try new things and experiment with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of look at it as a slightly different focus. So obviously, privacy is important, and trying to provide, the Neutrino stuff for BCH Wallet and additional privacy features is important. I really look at it as something for app developers. Right now, if you want to get started with BCH, you have to bring up your full node, and then that's not enough because you don't have an address index. You don't really have that great an API dealing with Bitcoin D. And now you have to bring up something like ElectrumX. You have to bring up some other indexing service. You need to use, BitDB or some other, index in order to really make it useful for developers. And having something you can stand up and actually start development against that has all the features you need quickly just has been missing from the space. And That's one of the reasons we're excited about things like UTXO commitments and other ways that we can get faster sync for app developers, better indexes so they don't need to bring up another piece of software to do these indexes, which makes it a lot more efficient and a lot easier for you to build your dev stack. And then being in Go, the development hurdle to kind of jump into that code base is greatly reduced. There's still a lot of complexity. We're still dealing with, a cryptocurrency, but compared to the Satoshi code base, you can really jump in and be a lot more effective quickly. And I think that's what this space really needs.
Right. So BCHD is meant for more of like developers and applications rather than like mining or anything like that.
So it does have a full mining interface. It's just we haven't really tested it very extensively, and we made the changes so that the mining code should be functional. Mm-hmm. But the reality is that milliseconds count when you're mining, and right. The fastest implementation is what the miner should run. So while it may be technically capable of doing it, we haven't run the performance tests needed to really know whether or not that makes sense for miners. So we focused on the app developers. And there's other basic things that BCHD offers that other full nodes don't. And right. Really basic, let's just say we have an SSL compatible RPC port with certs. Let's say like I bring up a server, I can actually connect to the damn thing remotely without using clear text protocols. And it just amazes me that Bitcoin D, after 10 years of development, and Bitcoin Core just refused because of some theoretical, well, we don't like OpenSSL and, TLS is bad. And like, they just punted on it and just were like, yeah, we're not going to do TLS for this. So, well, as an app developer, you need tools that work. You need stuff that I need to be able to connect to a remote server. I need to make this easy to deploy. I need compile times that are fast. Like with BCHD, if I want to get started building a binary, it takes 15 seconds to compile. Take that against, Bitcoin ABC, which is, primarily used everywhere, where, when every time I need to build that from source, it's like an hour to 2 hours of like watching my machine churn through C code. It's just not really great for iterative development. And the complexity really hurts the devs. You want to be able to write something and test it in 10 minutes, And so right now we're looking at other feature adds. I've been talking to Jonathan about getting a better way to index cash accounts into BCHD natively. There's already scripts to do that. In fact, the main service that I've seen that indexes cash accounts out there is written in Go already and uses our BCHD libraries. So moving that code natively into BCHD actually shouldn't be that difficult. But that's a lot easier in that code base. And we can provide those like nice to have and cool features and offer toggles for those and really provide that great app dev experience.
Right. Can you talk a little bit about the cache IDs?
So cache ID and cache accounts are slightly different. I think people have conflated them a little bit. And
for sure.
So cache accounts are literally just, I'm going to write to the blockchain what my address or my payment code or stealth address is, and offer a nice nickname and be able to find that. But it doesn't do any real identification. It's not a protocol for negotiating a login or doing something similar to OAuth. It's literally just a record of your address. Now, what I really would like to see is there's been some work on copay for stealth addresses. There's a proposal up right now in working code for stealth addresses there. I think that we really need to work as a community for a good stealth address standard that multiple wallets can use, because BIP47 just didn't take off. Unfortunately, the only wallet that implemented it really was Stash Wallet. As of today, when I use my phone, Stash Wallet doesn't even sync, doesn't work. So when I look at our options for reusable addresses, I see it being extremely limited, and we really need a standard for that. That way donation sites, anyone that needs a static address for any reason, isn't taking a privacy hit from doing that. And then we can start actually registering those as cash accounts. Doing a regular address as a cash account, it destroys your privacy. Everybody can see every transaction, every bit of money that you sent. But it's there as a convenience feature. And for some use cases, it's actually okay for the auditability. For instance, if you have a donation address, maybe you do want that to be public. You want everybody to know what donations you got in, make it very transparent. But that needs to be a choice. And usually that choice is going to be the exception. And we need something that allows for reusable addresses across the ecosystem. And I think that that's probably our next big fungibility win, is if we can get stealth or reusable addresses plus something like CashShuffle actually in use and in wallets within the first couple quarters of this year, I'd consider it a huge benefit to the community.
Definitely, definitely. I was going to ask kind of the differences, or the effects on privacy of BIP47 versus stealth addresses. Which is one better than the other, or is it just the fact that no one's really using BIP47? Because I tried to use the Stash wallet as well. I couldn't get it to work. I tried putting in some people's payment codes, nothing. I couldn't even send or receive. It just doesn't work. And I saw somebody said, it's coming in months. It's just kind of a little bit disappointing. It looked so promising, but nothing really.
So it worked for a while, and then after the fork, things just stopped working with Stash Wallet. And I don't know exactly. They haven't put out any public statement as to why the wallet's broken or what their future roadmap is. And so I think that we need to get more clarity from them. But I think Chris probably has better context on the differences between BIP47 and stealth addresses.
Yeah. So the primary issue is, I mean, it's a little bit technical. I mean, the stealth addresses are probably ideal for if you're running a full node and you can scan every transaction. They actually work really nice if you're running a full node. The issue is making them work in a more lightweight context. And I mean, it's doable, but it's not great, right? Like it usually involves like putting like a few bits, identifying bits in your transaction somewhere so the recipient can detect it and tell that it's for them. And those few bits would overlap with the bits used by other people so that you wouldn't like, you'd have like an anonymity set, but it's still the anonymity set's less than like the entire blockchain, like it would be with an actual stealth address. The BIP47, it improves on that a little bit in the sense that you have this like first transaction you make to kind of so that the other side can detect it, and then all subsequent transactions look like normal transactions on the blockchain. So there's like a setup, and then all the other ones after that are normal. I mean, and I think part of the problem there is just the sheer wallet complexity of that, and that's probably why it hasn't been adopted, is because to build a wallet that operates that way, it's a pretty major overhaul to most wallet software that I don't think people kind of want to do. And so, I mean, that's kind of where I think we are with the spec, is that it doesn't seem to be anything that's completely perfect. I haven't looked so far. Matthias had a proposal recently. I haven't looked too deep into that, where I glanced at the code, but he didn't write a spec yet. That would be a little bit easier for me to
so he followed the original stealth address spec mainly from 2016. I believe Peter Todd posted that spec, and he's using transaction hash grinding to generate a transaction that can be detected via SPV. So there's a prefix, and then they grind the transaction hash so that it has that prefix. And that way SPV wallets can just filter based off of those initial few bytes of the transaction hash. But it's, I'd like to see a written spec. Unfortunately, it seems that a lot of the developers in the space start with an implementation. We saw that with Graphene on BU, and now we're seeing that again with the reusable addresses from BitPay. And yeah. I really, really wish that there were written specs of exactly what they were doing up front, with a little bit more developer conversation around it, and something that I can just use as a spec to go create my implementation. By writing the C implementations and not writing the specs first, or JavaScript implementations, putting a lot of onus on the other developers that are using different languages to kind of reverse engineer a language that isn't their primary language, no matter what it is. So if I read the Graphene code that was added to BU, yeah, I know C++, but I'm not, the expert grade C++ developer that understands every edge case that's happening in that code base. And even if I wanted to port that and put the effort in, there's no guarantee that I got it correct, as I don't even know if their code is necessarily correct, because there's no spec for me to compare the correctness of what they actually wrote. So if they had any bugs in that implementation, then I would be porting over bugs rather than working on a specification. And I know that we can do a little bit better there. And I know that the devs get excited. They just want to write code. They want to do that. But for instance, with BU, people are using graphene, but it only works with other BU nodes, and there isn't a good path forward for players like BCHD or Bitcoin ABC to write an implementation that isn't just a direct port, which doesn't really lead to protocol maturity, I guess.
Not to bring up his name, but one of the things that Craig Wright promised before the BSV split was that Nchain was going to build a formal spec for Bitcoin Cash. And I thought that was a really good idea. And I'm like, oh, someone's actually going to invest some money into this and hire a technical writer and actually do it. And it was just another one of these promises that never got fulfilled.
Right.
But I still think something like that is needed. I mean, desperately needed. And it's also needed because when you have multiple implementations, they can have bugs, right? And at some point you want to be able to figure out, okay, well, what's the correct, which implementation is correct? Is it, if they're implementing two different things, like you want to have like a code and you can say, oh, this one is the one that diverged because here's what the spec is trying to do and here's what your code actually did.
Is there much of a conversation between the development teams of creating a spec like that? Is there anything moving forward, or is it still kind of a major problem?
So the closest I saw was, I believe it was, there was a specification site that was put online. I believe it was Gabriel Cardona that actually did that, that compared at least the RPC interfaces between the different nodes and payloads, and a little bit of specification there. But we really haven't seen a full protocol spec, especially for some of the scripting changes, new opcodes. A lot of people that are getting new to Bitcoin script, I'm actually sending them to the Bitcoin, BTC scripting documentation, as the stuff for BCH is really just not up to date and not as complete. The wikis are not as complete. And I don't know, it's a lot of effort to keep up with documentation. People think
it is. It's
doing docs is easy. It really isn't, especially protocol docs of the, as technical as we need them to be for this particular community. And that porting effort is non-trivial.
So I think the best thing they have on the BTC side is there's some developer documentation, like developer guide, developer documentation that I think is maintained. I haven't looked at it in a while, but it's still not a formal spec. And they even say that outright in the documentation, like this is just intended to be a high level thing and you're not supposed to go off of it. And it does in parts of it, it doesn't go into the real low level of what the protocol actually is doing. But that's probably the closest there is to a spec for any of this, really. I know the Bitcoin Core people like to say the code is the spec, the Bitcoin Core implementation is the spec, but it would be really nice to have an actual spec. And I think, especially in a multi-implementation environment where you can then see who's diverging from the actual spec, whether it's a bug or not, a bug or an actual consensus rule.
Right, right, definitely. Let's talk a little bit about the actual roadmap that y'all have for BCHD. I have a couple things that are written down that I found interesting. As far as I know, y'all are the only ones kind of implementing Neutrino as of now. Can y'all talk a little bit about that, about the benefits of it, and maybe about how far out it is from actually being implemented?
Yeah, well, Neutrino's 100% working right now. So that code was written and designed by Roast Beef. Did most of the heavy lifting on writing the code and the spec. And some of the BTC developers, I think it was Jim Posen. Is he the one who works at Coinbase, Josh?
Well, Jim actually left, but yes, he was working at Coinbase. He was actually the guy that trained me when I joined.
Okay.
And he'd been there for a long time. He worked on BTCD, and I actually ported some of his work over to BCHD. And I've talked to him a few times about it. He's helping us with a little bit of code review as well. He helped us with some of the normalization PRs for a constant time, and he's a really, really smart resource. And Chris took the initiative to really port over the BTC wallet code and create BCH wallet. and did a lot of heavy lifting to make sure that Neutrino could work within BCHD. I did some minor like code review and stuff, but really that goes to Chris for a lot of the effort there.
Yeah, that was really just it. So we have a different difficulty adjustment algorithm in Bitcoin Cash than they do in BTC. So I had to implement that in the Neutrino wallet because it handles its own header chain handling inside the wallet. So I had to change the difficulty adjustment. That was the primary change. The other change that I made was I had it, the Neutrino, when I took it over or when I ported it, it didn't tell you when you received an unconfirmed transaction, which is really terrible UX, right? Someone sends you a payment, you have to wait 10 minutes to see if you received it, or longer. And the reason I believe the reason they did that was because they didn't want to like blow people's privacy by, I don't know, doing some kind of Bloom filtering or something on the unconfirmed transactions.
Right.
But the alternative that basically what I implemented, and I did make it a config option, you can turn it off if you want, but it just downloads all unconfirmed transactions. And so, I mean, you're not blowing your privacy, or at least not that much, if you download everything. And I guess the downside there is you're going to use a lot more bandwidth, but I think the upshot is most people don't keep their wallet running 24/7, right? Especially if you're using a mobile app, you just open it up for a little bit, check your balance, close it out, so you're not getting slammed with that much bandwidth usage, even if you download all transactions while the app is open. And even at large transaction volumes, it's not that bad. And I have maybe a long-term plan for addressing the scalability of Neutrino at large transaction volumes, but yeah, it's not that bad.
Right. So like from a user perspective, let's say, you have your mobile, your light wallet on Neutrino, and you open it to check or if you received a payment, how long would it take, estimated to download all that and query to see if there's an unconfirmed transaction there for you?
Well, I think the app right now doesn't actually query the existing mempool. So I think you have to have the app open when you receive when the transaction is made for it to detect the unconfirmed transaction. I can make it do what you just said, where it'll like download the whole mempool, but that would be more bandwidth than is probably needed. So that's a UX design trade-off. Maybe we can talk about later on, but yeah. So right now it'll only detect your payment if you have the app open when the unconfirmed transaction is made. But it'll detect it when it comes in the block as well.
Right. Yeah, well, and then we do have some bounties open. Well, not necessarily bounties, but some features that we would love developers to look at. And one of them is kind of wrapping the BCH wallet to run on Android. It has a really nice RPC interface, and it's actually quite easy to compile for Android and get that running on your phone and expose that RPC interface and write a lightweight UI on top of what we've done for BCH Wallet. And I really would like to see another like kind of streamlined wallet that uses Neutrino, and mainly because I have been somewhat unhappy with the lightweight wallets that I've seen for BCH. I've wanted a truly lightweight SPV aware wallet for some time, and in this case, Neutrino. And it needs some basic features. Like I love the idea of Yenim Wallet, but it doesn't have send max. It doesn't have an easy way to back up your wallet. It doesn't have some of those like key checkboxes for me for a reliable, safe wallet to recommend, even though it's really simple to use. And I want something like that is based on the Neutrino spec, something where your average, new user to crypto gets a good experience. Yeah. And to me, the final pieces for that are really trying to figure out how could we integrate something like cash accounts directly in the wallet. I open up the wallet, I set it up the first time, it sets me up a cash account. In order for that to really work, we need that stealth address spec or a BIP47 implementation that works. And in the case of BCHD and BCH wallet, I actually think stealth addresses are a little bit easier to implement and use. And therefore, I think that's kind of the better direction. But I imagine a world where you open up your wallet, it asks you what your nickname should be, it immediately registers you a cash account for that wallet with a stealth address so that you can reuse that address over and over again. And then I'm saying, yeah, I am I'm Quest 103, which is what I am on cash accounts right now. And from a usability perspective, this is light year better than what we've seen previously. QR codes, sending around addresses, it's just really not a great user experience. People are used to nicknames. They want to have something that they can easily add to their address book and attach to an existing contact, and that is reusable so that they don't need to change that metadata or constantly be updating a third-party service with like, oh, this is my address now. This is my address now. This is my address now. And then you blow your privacy with the service, and anybody that's monitoring that service for your addresses is going to be able to kind of see all your payments. Is really not what we want for the future of fungible money.
Right. Definitely.
The interesting thing, one of the interesting things about the BCH wallet. So the code base, you can put it on, let's say you put it on a mobile device, it can use Neutrino, but it's also the exact same code base, just to tweak the config options, can connect to your BCHD full node if you have one. And now there's actually two ways it could connect to your BCHD full node. One would be to just use the Neutrino protocol to talk to your full node at home. But that would actually use more bandwidth than just simply using the RPC interface on your BCHD. So like if you had a full node running, like it could just connect to your RPC interface and use that too. And it's the same code base that does that. You don't need to like switch out a code base or anything. It would just be like, imagine a mobile phone where you go into your settings and you just say, use my full node, and you just enter your IP address and maybe the certificate for it. And then you connect to it and you're good.
Right. What is how's the privacy of a Neutrino light wallet compared to a full node? Because one of the arguments I hear a lot about kind of limiting or not limiting the amount of full nodes out there is, people who run a full node, the way the transactions are broadcast, it's a lot more private than having a lightweight wallet right now, which has to connect and, gives a lot of personal information. Now, a Neutrino wallet really limits that information, right?
Yeah, so it limits it on the download side when you're downloading from your peers and learning of your balance and transactions and all that. It actually doesn't do anything right now on the broadcast side when you're sending a transaction. So you still send the transaction to your peers, and since you're only sending, the only transactions you're sending are transactions that come from you, it's pretty easy for your peers to deduce that they came from you, right? So I mean, obviously you can use Tor, right? And that would probably be for like hardcore privacy. That would be like the way to do it right now would be you hook it up through Tor, and then you just, every time you make a new transaction, it goes out over a different IP address. It would be nice if we had some default privacy that didn't require Tor into it. And I've spent some time thinking about ways to do that, and I haven't really come up with anything yet. I mean, one thing I was thinking of is like, maybe we can relay transactions from other nodes. So like, we'll just periodically relay some transaction that we receive in the mempool to just make it look like it might be one of our transactions, so we can disguise our transactions among the ones that we relay. The problem with that is we can't validate the transactions that come into the mempool. And if you relay an invalid transaction, you're going to get banned from the other peers. So that's kind of like a sticking point, because then the other peers could just send you a bad transaction, then you relay it and you get banned. So yeah, I don't know. I would also spend some time thinking about how they do that dandelion relaying.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, in Bitcoin Core, and if we could do something, if we could make that work with Neutrino in some way, that would kind of be nice. But I would like to figure out some way of having a more private broadcast mechanism that doesn't require use of Tor.
Right, but compared to your right now the SPV wallets, is it a pretty good improvement overall as far as privacy?
Yeah. So every wallet that you use today, besides a full node, is going to give your full list of your addresses to third parties, whether that be like if you use the bitcoin.com wallet, you're going to give your full list of addresses to bitcoin.com. Now that's probably okay. You might trust Roger and Emil and that they're not going to keep any logs of this or tell people, hey, these addresses went with this IP address. But it's still a third party that knows your address list. Or if you use like an SPV wallet, like Bread Wallet, they use this bloom filtering technology that really kind of blows your privacy. It's trying to do it privately, but it ends up just the nature of how the bloom filter works. You end up blowing all your privacy there too. So yeah, there isn't any, the only real way to do it is to use a wallet that connects to your own full node to receive transactions today. So Neutrino is really the only one that allows you to receive transactions privately, right? Compared to a full node. It's probably not as private as a full node, but you have a smaller anonymity set, but it's certainly better than just outright telling a third party, hey, here's all the addresses in my wallet.
Right.
Now, we've already seen some instances of, service providers filtering services that they provide to just their wallet. And that's the first heads up that you have that they're monitoring your addresses. So for instance, there's a reason that I prefer SPV wallets to RPC style wallets. The Bitcoin.com wallet's really easy to use, but there's a reason that when you go to free.bitcoin.com to go and get your free BCH, that it doesn't work if you give it an address that's not a Bitcoin.com wallet. And the only way that they're able to say, oh no, this is only supported for Bitcoin.com wallets is by knowing the addresses that are associated with Bitcoin.com wallets. And so there is definitely a privacy loss there. And I think that having true SPV and Neutrino out there and having light wallets that can connect to any node is a lot more resilient. For instance, say that you have an RPC set of servers, and this affects many, many different wallets, right? And the government shuts down your RPC servers. Well, those wallets are dead. Those wallets will not work. So you've set yourself up with a single point of failure in the event that there is, legal proceedings happening against a particular wallet or their service infrastructure. With SPV, you're really protected from that. Worst case is the node that you were just using gets shut down for some reason, and it's going to find another node on the network, and you're going to be able to continue to conduct without worrying about any business party or their infrastructure being online. And I think people underestimate how important true SPV or Neutrino tech is when it comes to wallet infrastructure. And a lot of the SPV wallets have been a little bit of a letdown. I was really excited about Bread Wallet. Bread's been around for a long time, but their BIP70 support and their BitPay support has been broken for a year. I've been reporting bugs to them for a year, and they will not fix it. And it works on BTC, and it can't be that hard for them to fix for BCH. Yet they are not motivated to really do that, and it makes it hard for me to recommend that as an SPV solution. And the other SPV wallets that we've seen in the space, because of the split, Handcash was SPV and went to BSV, and now they're moving away from SPV completely, and they're going to a centralized infrastructure that I do not think is ideal. They're going back to that RPC style where they control the server farms that are connecting to their wallets. And there is UX benefit there, right? They can do custom things on their RPC that are hard to do with an SPV wallet. But the trade-off is now you have this, centralized piece that you have to trust. And a lot of them are not passing around kind of the transaction proofs and proofs that are necessary to make sure that those RPC interfaces are not feeding you bad data. And I think that that's really, really important in cryptocurrencies is, you should always be able to validate what an endpoint sends you or anything about a transaction or an address directly on the network. And I think a lot of people have kind of lost sight of that for UX reasons, even though I think that the UX problems can still be solved in an SPV or Neutrino world.
Yeah, and so part of, what I'm excited about with this, are, the BCHD or the BCH wallet is that, if you can create a high quality wallet backend, like you can drop that into any wallet app. It just requires, the developers only need to be a UI developer, essentially. They don't need to handle all the heavy lifting of the wallet on the back end. and it makes the development of these wallets and apps like so much easier. So like when someone like, you know, Handcash says like, oh, we're dropping the SPV, I don't know what their reasoning is, but like it's very complicated to write a good SPV wallet. I mean, and if every time someone wants to make a new wallet or a new app and they have to write their own SPV backend, that's a lot of work. So if you just have like a single backend that people can just say, oh, here's something that already works out of the box, has all the features that we want, and it's really easy to hack on it. So if we do need to make a small tweak, we can do that. That's kind of ideal, and they can just drop that in and just build the UI for it.
Interesting. Sounds good.
And that's why we like BCHD. I don't know if that's on a lot of people's radars, but it runs on more platforms than any other full node available for BCH. We can run it on, you know, Plan 9, NetBSD, FreeBSD, OpenBSD. It doesn't matter. We can run it on Android. We can wrap it in, you know, the Android Go mobile code. We can do all of these things because the code really is truly portable. And we've taken that extra effort to make sure that any specific features that we add that might only support, say, x86 or some specific platform also have quality fallbacks for these other, you know, operating systems to make it easier for these wallet developers. They don't need to think about platforms at all with BCHD because we cover all of them.
Yeah, it'll run on iOS too. You know, it's not just Android. Like both mobile platforms, it'll work.
Now, is anybody actually making a mobile wallet at the moment using BCHD, or is there any in development at the moment?
There is information about it that we've published, and then I've done some like preliminary research into it. And I know that Chris has also looked at some of the tools available, mainly because OpenBazaar, they're building a wallet for mobile, and they're using a lot of the Go toolchain stuff that is necessary to kind of make these services run on mobile hardware, whether that's iOS or Android.
Honestly, the actual coding of the UI is probably not even the hardest part. I tend to think the hardest part is the design. Like that's, I mean, maybe it's just because I'm a terrible designer, but like, you know, if someone created designs for a mobile wallet, you could bang out the user interface in just a few days, really. It's not a lot of work. But it's the coming up with something that looks good is probably the harder part.
Yeah,
Right.
and I think that there's been some really cool wallet designs from Jonathan Silverblood, trying to make sure that things are really straightforward for the user. I think that the UI he put together, while I understand why he did it the way he did, was a little bit more complex than is necessary. I really actually like really simple wallets for my mobile phone. I don't need multi-sig on my mobile phone. I don't need advanced features on my mobile phone. I need to open it, and it needs to open really fast.
Yeah.
I need to be able to scan QR codes really fast. I need real-time balance updates. I want something where when I go into a store and I want to pay with crypto, that I can open up that app and be paying within a second, right? And what I found is even in the wallet that I'm using right now, I'm using Edge Wallet because it actually has a decent feature set, and I don't really use its multi-currency features, but it does support BitPay, it supports Cash Adder, it supports like most of the tech that we're using on BCH, and I'm really a fan of Paul and some of the work that he's done in the space, but it takes freaking 15 seconds to launch, man. Like I open it up and then it asks me for my fingerprint and then I scan it and then like it spins for a second. And when it comes to commerce, you really don't want those delays. It actually takes longer for me to open Edge Wallet than it does for me to send the transaction. And both of those actions need to be really fast if we're looking at brick and mortar experiences. And that usability is really key.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd also like to see, you could use, I mean, so, you know, a wallet is one thing you could use for it. And I mean, another thing is, I mean, which is kind of a wallet as well, but like a backend for like a point of sale system would be kind of cool too. I think at this point in time, while adoption is really low and while everyone is pushing like multi-currency stuff, I think people are unlikely to want to, like merchants are unlikely to want to install like a BCH only point of sale system, right? So, but that would still be really cool to have, you know, so I'd kind of like to see one, but my suspicion is it probably wouldn't be very widely used. But if you did build one, I think BCHD would make a great backend for that too. looking to do things like, so like the BIP, so we haven't added BIP 70 yet, but when we add it, I also want to add it so you can serve BIP 70 payment requests too. So like it'll spin up its own little server there and you can serve them. So if you're like a merchant and you wanted to serve BIP 70 requests to people, you'll have an API to generate a new payment endpoint and can serve it up. And then once we get the like the double spend proof relaying stuff gets settled, then that can be included in there, and we'll have APIs that you can detect, you know, that'll notify you of a double spend detected and that sort of stuff that would be useful for back-end point of sale systems.
Speaking of the double spend proofs, I was curious because I saw that you're also working on an Avalanche implementation for BCHD. So kind of from how I understand it, you know, Avalanche kind of works as a double spend proof in itself, sort of. What's the benefits of kind of having both?
Well, I think the double spend proofs it's something that can be done in the short term. I mean, Avalanche, going from where we are today to actually seeing Avalanche activated as a consensus rule we're quite a ways from that. And so double spend relaying, it's not even a consensus rule. So, I mean, that could be done as soon as we can develop a good spec for it. So that's part of the thing is it's just, this is something we can do today, whereas Avalanche is going to require a lot more work and research and time and debate.
So to be more clear about some of the Avalanche work, right? So I'm excited about better zero conf. I don't think that zero conf should be probabilistic, right? Like it shouldn't be like, well, these other incentives mitigate the fact that this doesn't really work right. I don't think that's a good argument. I think that in order to have good peer-to-peer cash, that zero conf within 3 seconds should be something that you can really depend on as a merchant. And Avalanche is really neat tech to figure out if we can come up with better solutions for zero conf. But anchoring who is part of that consensus round and really what the consensus set is going to be for those Avalanche rounds is something that has yet to be decided. And a lot of the work in Avalanche right now is getting the protocol working so that we can do a round. Like, yeah, we don't know exactly who's going to be the participants in the real world when we actually attach this to BCH, but we need Avalanche code that works. You need to be able to do a round and ask a question and be able to do multiple rounds. You need to be able to figure out the way to do some of the signing for the Avalanche messages, those types of things. And those implementations are being written, and we're going to play around with a lot of different ideas. And I think that's why there isn't a firm date on when pre-consensus with Avalanche is going to hit. Is many of us, myself included, are really interested in getting something out there in kind of like log-only mode, right? So it doesn't do anything, but some way to do an Avalanche round, see if it's working, get statistics on it, have it log all the behaviors as to whether or not a transaction was accepted or denied, and then figure out, you know, based off of that data, whether or not the consensus set that we've picked is correct, whether or not this is actually going to work in the real world and get live data from mainnet before any of the Avalanche rounds are kind of acted upon. And that way, when we actually activate it as a consensus rule, or, you know, there's some discussion as whether Avalanche should only be looking at things in the mempool and deciding on like basically the mempool acceptance, or whether or not Avalanche should be something where if a transaction's accepted as part of Avalanche, that if a conflicting transaction actually appears in the block, do we orphan that block? Does it actually affect the block orphaning mechanics or not? Or is it just an informational based system? And I think there's like a lot of discussion still happening on those points where nobody really knows exactly what the finalized spec is going to look like, but knows that technology like this should be kind of investigated to make sure that we can try to fix the zero conf problems that we have. There are a lot of people that claim that zero conf is perfect today. I'm not one of those believers. And I think technically you should take any steps you can to make it as technically robust as possible, rather than band-aiding it over and over again with, oh, well, I found a way around, you know, broadcasting to these places allowed me to double spend. Oh, well, now everybody needs to run and put in, workarounds inside of their respective wallets and payment solutions and all of that. I think that's a terrible, terrible way to look at the problem. If someone's finding holes in a protocol and then you like kind of fix exactly what they found and then someone else finds an edge case versus a way that you could actually look at it and say, hey, I know this is going to work. This is definitely going to give me my zero conf guarantee. I don't understand why anyone would think that the latter is not the best option, right? Because like if I know for sure that in code they can't cheat, it's guaranteed to work, why wouldn't we be striving for that? It really confuses me sometimes when I see people talking about these technologies.
Yeah, and just to give you a like idea of like how nice the code base is, so I took some code that Tyler, he's another one, he works with us. He works with me at OpenBazaar and then helps out with the BCHD a little as well. He wrote some basic Avalanche code in a separate repository. It wasn't like wired up to the network or anything like that. And so I kind of took his code and then I spent like an afternoon, it was on like a Saturday. I just spent an afternoon and more or less in that short amount of time got like, I don't know, Avalanche code 75% up and running maybe. So, I mean, it's like real easy to hack on the code base. It's not a complex code base to use or anything like that. And some of the initial, results seem pretty promising. So, I mean, on like localhost, I was essentially finalizing transactions in as little as like, I think like 185 milliseconds or something like that. And if you think of like, well, what would that translate to on the network? So you could think of maybe 185 milliseconds as like the bare minimum amount of time. And like let's say the last query that you make goes out at the 185 millisecond mark, then you have to wait for that to get the response back, right? So so you can take that 185 milliseconds and just add whatever your round trip time is for the peers that you're connected to. So like, it seems like, and we'll have a better idea of this once I start playing with it on nodes running in separate data centers or what have you. But I wouldn't expect it to take a whole lot more than like 1 to 2 seconds to finalize a transaction in Avalanche. So you're talking like, and once it's finalized, it's permanently finalized. Like it's not only can no double spend, I mean, well, and I guess this goes to Josh's point, whether we're orphaning blocks or not, but if we are orphaning blocks, it's not just finalized, meaning like no other unconfirmed transaction can replace it in the next block, but like, even if someone were to do a 51% attack, they could wipe out the last 10 blocks, but they can't replace it with a transaction that's already been finalized. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it removes a lot of the economic incentive to do a 51% attack because you wouldn't be able to, let's say, get away with double spending in exchange in that model. So I mean, that's pretty nice to like be able to have a transaction totally finalized in 1.5 seconds or whatever it is. Oh, but going back to your original point on the double spend proofs, I think even in an Avalanche environment, I can still see a possible reason we'd want the double spend proof. I don't know if we want to have every single full node in the world querying a small group of miners to see if their transactions are valid. I mean, I guess if they're only doing it for their own transactions, then it's not going to hit the miners with that much bandwidth. But there's like 2 ways they could do it. They could either query the miners and do Avalanche, or they could just wait a period of time and see if they receive a double spend proof, right?
Right.
And both of those would more or less be equivalent. Like if you had the double spend proofs and Avalanche, you could be pretty sure if you don't detect any double spend in like 3 seconds, that your transaction would have been finalized by Avalanche, even without having to query, right? Without doing the Avalanche queries. So there's maybe some bandwidth savings to be had on the part of the miners if people just still rely on the double spend proofs rather than hitting the miners up every time they receive a transaction.
And I'm a huge fan of double spend proofs. Actually, when I went to the Instant Transactions conference, that was my main thing, was to try to push for double spend proofs on BCH, because it's back to time, right? Like, they're technologies that are they work well together. Avalanche and double spend proofs, they don't conflict in any way. They both provide good utility. And double spend proofs are far easier for us to get some implementation up than a full Avalanche working on BCH.
Right.
I don't believe that we should be rushing into things that change pre-consensus and that do pre-consensus. I don't think that we should be trying to like rush these things. I think they need to have good data and really be ready for mainnet. With double spend proofs, we don't have those risks. We can get those done far faster. We can get that implemented in the ecosystem quickly if those specs get generated. And then it buys us time on Avalanche. So say that Avalanche takes a year, right, for us to really feel comfortable with actually making that on mainnet, making decisions about, you know, orphaning a block or even what consensus set really is the correct one to use for these Avalanche rounds. Well, that whole time we can have double spend proofs and we still have way better than what we have today. And it addresses multiple types of double spends. The only one it doesn't really address for us is the minor bribe double spend of it just appearing in a block. And that's the hardest type to really deal with, even with Avalanche, as that goes back to the debate of orphan or not orphaning blocks based on Avalanche rounds. But double spend proofs, I see nothing but an upside if we can get those implemented, and the time to implementation is dramatically reduced.
Right. Yeah, it seems to make a lot of sense, and also go with kind of like how Bitcoin Cash developed. It's almost the same thing as the Lightning Network. You know, it's like, should we halt things right now for future technologies that may be ready by X amount of time, or should we go ahead and start working on a fix now, and while we're researching other options? So
yeah,
I can see how that makes a lot of sense. It kind of goes with like the ethos of Bitcoin Cash.
And double spend proofs, they don't require a consensus change. So
right.
like we don't need to worry about it doesn't even have to happen on hard fork, right? It's like we just need to figure out a way to be able to do the types of messages that need to be passed around for the proofs. And we could have just one implementation to actually do that, and then hopefully write the specs first, and then have other implementations be able to also build on those specifications. It's just a win.
Right. Sounds like it. Chris, real quick, I want to hit while you were talking about Avalanche, because I've seen the question pop up a lot of times, and I'm curious myself too. You said Avalanche, you might have finality within 1 to 2 seconds. Now, is that with a non-contentious transaction? Like 99%, 90% of the nodes that are voting are like, yes, that's good, or is that what are we looking at for like those worst case scenarios? 50-50 splits may take 13, 14, 15 rounds of voting. Is that within 1 to 2 seconds as well?
No, that would add more time. That's kind of like the bare minimum, assuming that, well, I guess that's kind of assuming there isn't a double spend. But yeah, if there is so even a double spend would, it would finalize pretty quickly, but I'm not sure how much longer it would add. It might add another half a second or a second to resolve a double spend. There is some risk of it never resolving if an attacker controls enough of the consensus group. They can like flip-flop their votes and like permanently keep it in a state of being unfinalized. But that does require, if we're using like, let's say, hashing power, I'm not sure what the actual threshold is, but it would require certainly at least a majority of the hash power to do that. Maybe more than a majority, maybe like 60 or 70%, depending on what the parameters are.
And wouldn't you have to kind of like keep that going for an extended amount of time as well? Like that's not, happen once and then it never finalizes. Wouldn't you have to keep on doing that for a while?
Yeah. I mean, you'd have code that just does it automatically, but I think the way I kind of look at it is like, I think the worst thing that an Avalanche attacker could do is like a form of a denial of service attack, but you can already do a denial of the service attack already with 51% hashing power. So it's not really opening up the network to any more of an attack that doesn't already exist, assuming you use mining power for it.
The lack of being able to finalize a double spend like transaction, right? So if there's a bunch of contention, the 50-50 split you're talking about, I look at it as a combination of other technologies that actually make that okay. So for instance, if people are using payment requests, right, like BIP70, then I have a refund address, right? So as a merchant, I can say, well, if I'm not finalized within 3 seconds, something bad has happened. Because in the happy path, it does finalize that fast, right? So you can wait a certain amount of time. And then if it doesn't finalize in that amount of time, you reject the payment. You reject the payment. And if for some reason it goes through and you have a payment request for it, then you have a refund address and you just send them the money back if it confirms, and you just reject the payment. And it's a very simple solution. And if someone is honest and they're paying the correct way and they're not sending a double spend, well, they're going to get that confirmation immediately. And in the case where we're not, something weird is going on. Like there is malicious activity at play. So just reject it and send them their money back if you get it. And this is a very simple solution for merchants to use. And it's technologies that are available today in a concert with Avalanche that makes the payment processor flow something that can still be bulletproof, even if they never get the finalization on that double spend.
Right. Yeah. It seems like it'd be very, very much edge cases where anything weird happens, like 99.9% of the time, it'd be 1.5 seconds, boom, you're done. Mm-hmm. So it's like, why cater to somebody that's trying to mess with it anyways? But I know we're going on a little bit, a little bit here. I want to try to keep it as short as I can. So I want to grab a couple more topics real quick on BCHD. Payment channels, as soon as malleability fix, that's something that I'm really interested in looking for, use cases outside of, routing them like the Lightning Network. Now I did see that something was talked about, with routing them in some manner, but kind of what is y'all's vision for payment channels? Like what could you use them for in 3 years time? What might develop around them?
Maybe some kind of micro payment services, where I know you pay per amount of data you stream, or that sort of thing. I think that's kind of what I was looking at it in terms of, is like subscription based micro payment stuff. I don't know if I don't have any plans of doing any kind of routed payment channels. I wrote this like kind of very rough partial implementation of just the bidirectional payment channels as it is, and I can tell you the complexity of that was just like, I would not want to even attempt to implement the routed payment channels, given how like hard it is to even just wrap your head around like what's going on and what the state of the channel is at this point in time. And that point in time, just trying to do just regular pushing payments back and forth to each other. Right. And so, yeah, the routing would just add like a whole nother level of complexity that doesn't seem like it's going to be worth it to me. But what I kind of would like from the implementation is there'd be several new API calls in the BCH wallet. One would be to get like a payment channel address. So you'd have like kind of the equivalent of an address that you would give it to someone else, and then they enter that, and that would open a channel with you, and they could fund it, and then you'd have an API call to send payments or close the channel, view your balances, that sort of stuff, and some basic bidirectional functionality.
Right. Now, if they're non-routed, wouldn't it be very easy to make? Isn't that like super private between two parties?
Yeah.
Yeah,
literally it's just
you do have the on-chain transactions to set up and close the channel.
Right. You could open it with like a stealth address, couldn't you? Or could you?
Yeah, though I don't know if that really helps with the privacy that much. Like the stealth address is kind of for it's for the use case where you want to publish like a single address but receive to multiple ones, right? If you're not trying to publish a single address, then you can just give a new address every time to whoever's paying you.
Well, so I may be, in the minority in the BCH dev community, but when I look at a permissionless coin, that means that people can build whatever layer 2 they want. My main criticism of the plans for Lightning are not just like hate for Lightning, I do think Lightning is too complex, and I think that the user experience leaves something to be desired as a scaling solution by itself. But I think the tech is actually pretty neat. And payment channels provide a lot of benefits, metered billing being one of them. Things like Satoshi's Place, that didn't need Lightning. It just needed a payment channel. And being able to do those little microtransactions are really valuable. For me, it's about on-chain fees should stay low. Scalability on-chain should still be a focus, but that layer 2 solutions are something that we absolutely should welcome into the space. But it should be voluntary, and it should be based off of the use and wanting to use those technology because it's better. And I'm all for as much research as can happen. And what I see a lot is people will demonize projects that are being built as, on top of BCH and say bad things, whether that was people ripping Wormhole apart because they thought Wormhole would be the end. And it's like, well, if you're dealing with a real decentralized permissionless currency, I can't stop devs from building layer 2 stuff. I can't stop them from building whatever it is that they want. But what I can do is make sure that the chain that I'm building on is one that respects that fees should be low on chain, that on chain functionality continues to work as expected, and then also welcome layer 2 solutions to try to propose whatever it is that they want. And it's up to free market economics and us as users to decide what technology is actually going to be valuable. And, I was not a fan of the burn, and I thought there was certain things Wormhole did that were kind of cool. They were like mobile wallet was actually kind of neat, and some of the stuff they were doing was cool. But I didn't use it because I'm not really a fan of the burn. But me demonizing a project because I don't agree with them, that violates everything that I believe should be true about sound money, everything that I believe is true about permissionless innovation. People should be able to build whatever they want, and it's up to us to decide whether or not that's valuable or usable for us. And if it's not, it goes away. And we decide not to use it, and they put in some effort, and they realize that that effort was wasted because nobody wanted to use their stuff, and then they disappear. And I think that's an inevitable cycle. We're never going to see a coin where every single technology on the coin from every developer that's developing on it is something that you like. And it's not a reasonable expectation to believe that that should be true.
Right. I definitely agree with you. It's kind of strange. I've gotten a little bit of looks for it because the only reason that I ever got any attention is because I love to trash the Lightning Network like a year ago back in very early development.
Great.
But that was during the time of $50 transaction fees and just insanity. It's like, why don't you just let us actually transact while you're building this crazy complex thing? It's not layer 2 itself. It's Bitcoin is not miners. It's not layer 2. It's money. So if I can't use it, something's wrong.
Exactly. And the truth is that Lightning Network, it wasn't that Lightning was bad. It was that Lightning was looked at as a cure-all for everything that was bad happening on chain. And they were refusing to actually fix the issues for on-chain transactions, which is crazy. As the, someone supporting a crypto network, right? If I'm a developer of any cryptocurrency, I should be making sure that the UX for my users is good. And I'm sorry, $50 fees is not a good UX.
Right.
And things like auto channel negotiation, I'm sorry, I don't want someone automatically opening shit if it costs $50 per fucking transaction. That makes zero sense economically for me to trust an autopilot when it's very expensive for me to run that autopilot. And all of these things were very preventable. And I think that that was really what SegWit 2x was about, was give us time. We need a bit block size increase. We need that now. And it got fought against. And BCH got created as a result of, what I considered bad economic planning on the main chain. And I've loved Bitcoin. I've been using Bitcoin since 2012, right? I wish that Bitcoin would have just decided to scale in both avenues. Right? It's fine. Roast Beef's a smart guy. The guys working on Lightning, not all of them are just malicious, evil people. No, they're smart, technical people. They have a dream for what they want to build. But also let the on-chain scalability folks also work on it. And let's get those technologies in and scale both at the same time so that we don't pigeonhole ourselves to just one technology that is the future of the chain. It should all be based off of, what actually works. And if Lightning ends up working better and they scaled the block size, well, eventually you wouldn't need to scale the block size much more because people were actively using it and it worked. But before it works, having an argument like, oh, we're not going to scale, we're not going to do anything on chain, and we don't even know if this new tech is going to work, that's just crazy. Like, you're betting the farm on something that has no empirical proof that the users care about that solution. Mm-hmm. And for me, it was really about the or part of this conversation that happened on BTC, when I always thought it just needed to be an and.
Right. And that's one thing that really, whenever I saw y'all's roadmap and I saw that, bi-directional payment channels were there, I got kind of excited, because although I don't like Lightning Network as a scaling solution particularly, it is good for other things like micropayments and in particular interoperability. So the way I see it is it gives a way for Bitcoin Cash to be able to interact with anything, that's built for Bitcoin or Litecoin or any of those that are scaling via layer 2. We have on-chain scaling for whatever we want, while it's permissionless, where we could have wallets that, have channels with bridge nodes. And then, if there's a vending machine that takes Bitcoin Lightning, you could just whip out your Bitcoin Cash wallet and boom. You could do both without really sacrificing much, in my opinion.
Yeah, another thing I thought, payment channels can potentially be good for. There's several different possible solutions here. So I think it's for the inter-exchange clearing, right? Off-chain, like inter-exchange type clearing. So like, I think this is like, you see both like Elizabeth Stark and the Lightning company trying to go after this market. Same thing with Blockstream's Liquid project. They're going after this same inter-exchange market. There's also, Ripple has an interesting technology, Xcurrent, which could also work well for that. But just garden variety payment channels can potentially also work in that area too. So imagine like Coinbase has an open payment channel with a Circle, right? Or whatever it is. So as a Coinbase customer, I want to send a payment to someone at Circle, and I ask for their address. They could give me maybe some kind of newfangled address type that maybe has like a script pub key in it, or a pub key hash, as well as maybe like an identifier for Coinbase, right? Or Circle or whatever it is. And then I give that address to Coinbase. Coinbase looks at it. If they don't recognize the identifier, they just send an on-chain transaction. If they do recognize the identifier and they say, oh, this is Circle, and oh, I have a channel open with Circle, let me just push the payment to Circle off-chain over the channel, and then they can receive the payment and credit the user's account at that side. I think that's an interesting use case as well. I don't know if that use case will necessarily be better than the full Lightning model or the full Liquid model or that Ripple Xcurrent system, but at least it's a potential option there.
But I also look at Avalanche as playing a role in that too. If we can get pre-consensus systems working, then confirmation requirements on exchanges can be dropped to a huge degree. And we can avoid the complexities of payment channels altogether with those kinds of transactions. So if I know that my zero conf is going to be there, and let's just say that there's a world where we do orphan blocks that contain a double spend based off of Avalanche rounds of previous transactions, well, then you know that that's going to make it to a block in 99.9 bar cases that it's going to make it. And if that's the case, then sending between exchanges shouldn't require confirmation requirements anymore. We don't need to worry about complexities of bringing up and holding liquidity in a channel. We don't have to do those things. So I think there's multiple ways to skin the cat, right? And that's up to the free market to kind of decide what the best avenue for that is. Cross-chain atomic swaps are a really interesting feature of Lightning as well. Makes it a lot easier for me to transact in the currency of my choice and automatically exchange, switch that at payment time. So if I go to a merchant, they only take BTC, but if we had LN across multiple chains, I could send BCH and have that instantly converted. Is a really powerful feature of that the Lightning developers are working on. And then, but the thing is we need to keep the chain, cheap on chain so that we're not forced to use those solutions when they don't make sense. And we can use them when they do. And for me, the metered billing and the exchange use cases are really good use cases for payment channels. And hopefully we see more of that in the future. But at the end of the day, for the UX, the end user really needs an experience that feels frictionless, right? I don't want to go into my mobile wallet and see two balances. I don't want to see that. Yeah, I don't want them to act or feel like separate coins. And the reality is that Lightning wallets right now, they do feel like separate coins. It feels just like using an altcoin. I have two balances. I have my locked in channel balance, and then I have my on-chain balance. And then there's different rules, and I have to transfer between them, just like I would need to if I was using Shapeshift to move to a different currency. And that UX is just not something end users want. At the end of the day, it's easy for us to lose sight that 99% of the users we want using these blockchains are not technical. We need it to be easy enough for those people. They need to open up a wallet and see a balance and send something and receive something and not need to worry about full nodes. They don't need to worry about channels. They don't need to worry about multiple balances. They don't need to worry about any of this stuff because they just flat out don't give a shit. They don't care. They don't want to care. They want money that works. They want a wallet that sends fast. And the UX is so key for these things. And with payment channels, metered billing and all of that, how do we do that and have specs for that make it really transparent for them where they don't need to think about it? I just am paying someone or connecting to someone, and that UX makes sense to someone that just doesn't know about the technical specifics at all. They shouldn't see the word, like payment channel. They shouldn't see the word, Lightning Network. They don't care.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting problem. I don't know if y'all have tried like the Satoshi, the wallet of Satoshi, that, or the Blue Wallet, those two new Lightning wallets, but they're custodial, and at least the Satoshi place, or the wallet of Satoshi, it doesn't even have an on-chain ability. It's strictly Lightning. It's it's super easy to use for what it is. And of course, I saw a lot of people, saying, hey, it's custodial, that's a load of crap. And I agree. But actually the people that are less involved with crypto, not the 500 people that I kind of see on Twitter that I've told about it and been like, oh, it's custodial. They're like, oh, a custodial wallet. You mean I don't have to back up my shit? Well, awesome. People just don't care at all. Generally speaking.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know. I'm a little bit torn as to like what the future would look like if if this stuff ever does take off, if it's going to be predominantly custodial wallet usage, or if we can convince enough people to actually control their own keys. Part of that relies on the UX, but I think part of it also relies on people's belief that their stuff is secure. Like, if you use let's say an Android device and you haven't rooted it, there's like, Android has like 6 or 7 different layers of security, and you have to like go through and disable every single one of them in order for you to be hacked. Putting aside any kind of like 0-day or, major bug in Android, but like, it seems like unlikely that if you had like, your phone and something like your coins and something like that you're going to be hacked,
So my biggest fear about a lot of this technology is only in the cases where on-chain transactions are really expensive. Because if the on-chain transactions are really expensive, then custodial wallets provide a really, really huge value, right?
Yeah.
So like all of a sudden, if someone already has a channel open with a bunch of liquidity in it, and you don't have to open an on-chain transaction, that means you save $50. Well, if they know that doing that in their non-custodial wallet costs them $50, and someone comes out with a custodial wallet and says, well, in order to use us, you need to pay $4.99 a month or $10 a month or whatever, that actually is a good value proposition for the end user. But that totally ties them to that one provider. They're totally, their censorship resistance goes away because all of a sudden they've added another hop of someone that can turn off their wallet, right? We're trying to get away from a world where someone can freeze your bank account. And
Yeah.
if you're using a third-party custodial service, they do their best. They want to service as many users as possible because they want to make money, right? But at the end of the day, if the IRS contacts them or some other government entity contacts them, your shit's off. Your shit's turned off. It's just
Mhm.
going to be what happens. And that's no better than the financial system we have right now.
Yeah.
And for
You know,
me,
it's
I
fun.
want to know that my money can't be turned off.
Yeah. It's funny. I mean, you say that with the fees because, before Lightning Network was even a thing, I was under the impression that the way that like Greg Maxwell, for example, wanted to scale, Peter Todd wanted to scale Bitcoin was just to have everyone use custodial wallets, right? That the on-chain just cost $100 a transaction, maybe more. And, everyone just has a wallet with Coinbase and other places. And, and they clear their transactions off chain. So they use something like Liquid to clear their transactions between exchanges. And so transactions would be really cheap, but it would just be this like custodial model. And it's more or less just the people who can afford the $100 transactions who are using it on chain. Now we're even seeing people like Tur Demeester come out and be like, oh, I can't wait for $1,000 transaction fees, right? Like, and I mean, nobody's using Lightning no one's using Lightning at $100 transaction fees. They're certainly not going to use it at $1,000 transaction fees to open a channel. And so I still think the long-term strategy for them is custodial wallets. You read like Saifedean's Bitcoin Standard book, he more or less implies it's going to be custodial wallets, how it's going to scale. I don't know. That to me, that's not like what made me interested in Bitcoin was Bitcoin as a peer-to-peer system, not a custodial system. And the reason for that is because, the gold standard, the properties that they're trying to create with like, if you have a very decentralized but expensive and cumbersome to use base layer, and then everyone has to use a custodial system layered on top to transact, you've just described the gold standard, right? That's exactly how the gold standard worked, pretty much to a T. And, the gold standard didn't work out well for us. And it didn't work out well for us because of like bad economics. It didn't work out well because the custodial nature of the thing made it very easy to control and exploit and ultimately just get rid of entirely.
Yeah, and there's always going to be room for custodial services. I don't want this to sound like a bash on custodial services. They're needed.
Yeah.
And for exchanges, it makes sense that they have custodial wallets because they deal with fiat that can be reversed. They have a bunch of other stuff and considerations for why they need that custodial nature for their balances. And we're going to need regulated exchanges for liquidity. We're going to need that for remittance markets. We're going to need it for a lot of things. But as I've always told, my friends and people that want my advice is when you're dealing with an exchange, you make your exchange and you get it off the exchange and you get it to your non-custodial wallet and you own the keys and you own that money. And the only time that you should be dealing with those custodial entities is when you need to, right? So like there's many custodial services I like. I love Purse. I like using Purse, but it's a custodial wallet. And they do that on purpose, and that's totally fine. So I know that I put as much on there as I'm willing to use for my purchases, and then I take it off. And obviously I'm at Coinbase, and I think that we provide a very valuable service to our end users, and it makes it simpler. It makes it cheaper if you're dealing with other Coinbase users, because I can send balances off chain, and we have a much better security infrastructure than most people in the space, and we provide that value. But that doesn't mean you should keep all of your coins on Coinbase. It means that when your coins are on Coinbase, that we're going to do our best to secure them. But you should always have those non-custodial wallets, which is why I'm happy that we have a non-custodial wallet offering in Coinbase Wallet that will soon have BCH support. I believe that's scheduled for Q1. And then we also have our Coinbase Commerce Solutions, which are a nice mix where it's a non-custodial solution, but we still offer, a nice UX and make it a lot easier for end users to get merchant services up and running. And so there's always going to be a blend. The key is that allowing people that want to control their own keys, that want to control their own money, are able to do that, and that the fees are not, counterproductive to them doing that. And as long as that's true, people can build whatever custodial services they want. We can choose whether we use custodial services.
Yeah.
It's when you put that economic incentive of really high fees if you're doing it non-custodial on top of it that brings the incentive structure out of line and makes it so that custodial services make more sense to the end user. And I think that's something that we don't want. It shouldn't be, I always use custodial services because the chain is so expensive, I can't really use this myself anymore. It's not anti-custodial, it's anti-forced custodial.
Right. I definitely see in the future, I expect custodial services to be more like credit card companies. Like, it's a payment processor or a processor that might have 0.5% cash back and rewards outside of, hey, use us because you can't really use the main chain. They have to compete with features rather than just being the de facto, use them because it's really the only way to do it economically.
Well, everything should be based on that, right? It should all be based off of economic incentives and what makes sense for the end user. The end user wants a good experience. They want it to be cheap. They want it to be fast. They want all of these things, and they want the complexity to be low or non-existent, right? Ideally, non-existent. When they open up their wallet, it should be non-existent. Even when I see someone say like, oh, write down your 12 words, right? Well, a lot of people will lose that, or they're going to write it on some paper that is not in a safe place. And like managing those keys is difficult. I like the solutions in a lot of wallets now where they automatically back up like an encrypted backup to Google Drive. So it's encrypted on Google's side with Google's keys, and the file that you uploaded is encrypted with your keys. And you have a good idea that no one is tampering with that file, but I can put that on Dropbox. I can put that on Google Drive. I can put that on any backup solution, and it feels normal to an end user. 1 million apps have backup to Google Drive. That's exactly how your crypto wallet should work.
Right.
It shouldn't require any special crypto knowledge at all. And even telling someone that it's about these 12 words requires some level of crypto knowledge.
Definitely. So speaking of kind of how things evolve like that and how they should, if you were to look 10 years ago, people would have laughed at Bitcoin. If what I read is correct, it was only online transactions at first. You had to back up they were non-deterministic wallets. You had to back up each individual address with its own private key and not like a phrase, the actual key. And, it was just clunky and, nobody thought it'd work. And we've gone from there to now in 10 years. So given the problems like the ones we've kind of mentioned, we're still using addresses with QR codes for the most part. Nothing else has really taken off. What do you kind of expect over the next 10 years, kind of the user experience? What do you imagine to be implemented? Like, how are we, what's the future of Bitcoin Cash like? Kind of summed up in like a minute or two from each of y'all.
So to me, the future of Bitcoin Cash is being able to scale on chain without exposing that complexity to users. Users should have the simplest payment experience possible. So I think cash accounts are going to play a large role in that. I think services like Cash ID are going to play a role in that. And I'm actually really disappointed in the progress that's happened in the first 10 years. I think that we had a lot of cryptographers, a lot of smart folks that were looking at these blockchains and not thinking about the user experience. We don't have the wallet experiences we really want today, and that's after 10 years. And part of that is like basic things like no SSL RPC interfaces and like basic stuff on the back end that was like, oh, this isn't the cryptography. This isn't, SegWit. This isn't Schnorr. This isn't this or that. And it's like, you know what? My mom doesn't give a shit about Schnorr. Doesn't care. Just doesn't care, man. Like, does it send money? Does it send money? Does it work? Can I transfer value? And I want BCH to be that one where like your regular user can use it. And they don't need all that extra sophistication. I'm not asking them to run a full node. I'm not asking them to run their own indexing services. I have tools that are really easy for developers to use. Back to the point that Chris made earlier with, the mobile wallet pieces, having backends that you can just plug in that do all of the functionality and are well tested. And then we have a wealth of UI options on wallets with slightly different feature sets, but they're all building off of similar bases. And I think we're finally starting to get there. And we still see predominant wallets that are terrible to use, right? Like Bitcoin ABC, great full node, terrible wallet. Like literally delete that shit from the repo. It's like every time you create an address, I got to back the fucking thing up again is insane. So like there's no real good value there to me to have these kind of legacy wallets that are really difficult for users to use. I think that we'll see stealth addresses or reusable addresses or whatever we want to call them. I like reusable addresses. In reality, they should just be the addresses. Like we should see over the next 10 years that your standard pay to pub key hash address doesn't matter. Doesn't matter at all. Like we don't even use them anymore. We have a reusable standard that everyone can use and they just get default privacy. And that works in every single wallet and the end user doesn't have that complexity. I hope we get to a world where we don't even see an address, that stealth address or reusable address isn't even something I would send to someone. I'm just sending them my nickname and the wallets deal with all of that themselves, and that we have SPV and enough nodes to service SPV and Neutrino users. And there's just two sides to the economy, right? You have your users and they use, and they don't care about the tech that just needs to work it, and they need the UX. And then you have the technical community. And we're going to work on better standards, faster speeds, better scalability, and all of that is in our technical community. And we don't expect for everyone to be part of that community, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And if we can get there, I think that would be where I want to see the chain in the next few years.
That's good.
Yeah, I agree. And I agree with everything with that. I'd also point out, like, I mean, there was this debate between like, BSV and BCH, like, what I've always wanted was to scale without sacrificing decentralization. And I mean, there's always like a little bit of antagonism there. But like, I think my problem with like the Bitcoin Core people was like, they're trying to argue that like 2 megabytes is going to centralize the system, right? Or it's a corporate takeover.
Absolutely insane.
And like, I mean, obviously I don't believe that, but on the flip side, I do think there is genuine concern if you try and blow out the scale without making the prerequisite changes needed to optimize the optimizations, possibly some protocol changes, and the things that are needed in order to scale. I think there is a very real risk of centralizing the system. And I mean, to some extent, I'm kind of glad that like the BSV people forked off, because like some of them now are even saying like, Bitcoin is not a decentralized system. Like they're swapping out the term decentralized for like competitive, and they're saying, it's intended to be a competitive system, not a decentralized one. I don't agree with that. I want it to remain as decentralized as possible while we scale, and it's technically challenging, but also it seems possibly feasible too.
Well, there's a split on the decentralization. So to me, there's two primary use cases for Bitcoin. Whatever Bitcoin you want to consider the Bitcoin, right? One is money, right? And money is UTXOs. And UTXO scaling, UTXO commitments, being able to bring up a node and being able to get the UTXO set, and solves that problem for a lot of the nodes where you don't need to be a full archival node in order to run a node. You can come up and you can participate in the money aspects of Bitcoin immediately. And to me, that's the thing I care about keeping as decentralized as possible. If the chain gets really, really big, right? Like right now we're lucky, it's like a couple hundred gigabytes, right? It's not actually that big. But imagine a chain that's 200 terabytes, right? Well, a 200 terabyte chain, I don't need everything for payments, right? I just need the UTXO set, and I need to worry about decentralized, like keeping it decentralized in the context of that UTXO set. I think UTXO commitments gets us most of the way there. And then archival nodes that really want to store like 8 terabytes of stuff for data, things like Memo or BlockPress or whatever. If there's less of those nodes, but I have a cryptographic proof that the UTXO set is always correct, and that I can just sync that for my monetary use case, then I have decentralized money. And then I'm only relying on archival nodes to store all of that. And maybe I pay a fee for that. Maybe I pay a monthly fee so that they can support the extra bandwidth and storage requirements for them to do full data workloads. But I consider those two different concerns, right? Like I'm less concerned about, oh, can I sync the whole thing from Genesis if I have a 200 terabyte blockchain, and can I always make sure that that works? Well, honestly, I'm not so concerned. I want decentralized money, and I don't
Yeah.
mind if data storage is like something you pay a little bit extra for as a value added service, as that doesn't take away from the decentralization of the money. So I think that kind of is a good distinction to think about when you think about how these networks scale. Because if we put a lot of data on there, there are going to be centralization pressures on the data, but that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that it cascades to money.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely agree. I see a lot of people, mostly in the SV side now, and the core people that have kind of jumped on the bandwagon because BSV is not as much competition as BCH is. So, but they call the BCH crew like medium blockers. I actually think that's pretty reasonable. I think people it's like the core side, they overdo decentralization. The way I see it is it's kind of like a scale. And on one side, you have like decentralization, and on the other side, you have censorship resistance. There's like a point of the chain, or however you want to measure it, the decentralization being more than what it takes to be censorship resistant in any way. You really don't have any more benefits. Is it, Luke Jr. wants to take the block size down by 2/3, because for him, no light walls, they basically want to stream the blocks in everything, radio, satellite, it's just like that information's everywhere. But is it really going to help, or is somebody really going to be able to shut the network down? Or is it going to be harder if 100 people per city are running a full node versus 10 people in every city in the world? Not really. You're not getting any benefits at all. So,
but they're looking at the wrong metric. To be perfectly honest, they're looking at the wrong metric, right? It's not about the size. You look at what is happening right now. Countries get their internet turned off, like flat out. Like Zimbabwe right now, internet is off right now because of government censorship on the actual cables that are bringing internet into their country.
Right.
And if you look at the network landscape, right, data centers versus home nodes versus all of these things, it really doesn't matter if there's 5,000 nodes running on Comcast. Really doesn't matter. It's the same as like 2 nodes running on Comcast, because Comcast could just turn that shit off. They could disable the port. And when you look at data centers, we get better censorship resistance from data centers anyway. Because data centers, when I put my co-located equipment, or I'm dealing with that vendor, I have a contract that says that they're not going to filter my internet. I also have multiple choices in backbone providers that I can actually have put over to my cages and cabinets. So if I get filtered from UUNet, I could go and use Sprint's backbone network or some other backbone network. So in order for us to really have this resilience, people need to look at the actual network topologies that are out there. And what bothers me is like some people, they look at the network stack and they give unfair comparisons, right? And so a lot of times people are like, well, lightning routing works like this or that. And it's like, well, it doesn't work like TCP routing at all. And when they compare it to BGP is a trust system. It's a trust system. People poison BGP gateways like on a regular basis. And we have these giant exploits where people are broadcasting incorrect routes. And it's a big deal on the internet because that is fundamentally flawed on how they do that if you care about decentralization. And these comparisons are just really, really bad. The network topologies that Luke Jr. is talking about do matter, right? Like being able to get your blockchain from a non-internet source does matter. But let's think about the reality, right? If your internet in your country gets turned off, you're not sending remote banking stuff. You're not doing shit. Your internet for everything you use in your life is off. Like you're already fucked. Like there's no benefit there. And I'm all for, if BTC wants to reduce their block size, I think that's a terrible idea. But if they want to go ahead and do that, that's just more benefits for, the other chains that are willing to scale. And 300 kilobyte blocks, I mean, like that's insane. You have usage on BTC that's far higher than that on any spectrum, right? The blocks are always around a meg even today. If they were to reduce the block size, then basically you're saying that poor people don't matter. You've just priced out half the planet. And if you want to talk about censorship, price point is censorship. You know, poor people can't go to Whole Foods, right? Like
Yeah.
they can't go and like buy expensive goods. And if you price them out, that is a form of censorship. And so I don't think he quite understands that the trade-off he's saying is, well, I don't believe in censorship in this medium of internet access and satellites and all of this, but I'm totally fine with the economic censorship of poor participants and making sure they can never use this product and that it's going to be completely useless to them. And I don't understand how he can say that with a straight face.
Yeah, I was always a bit of, I don't know, I kind of like a realist. I consider myself when it comes to full nodes, like their vision of every user running a full node just does not sound realistic to me. In fact, I would say any vision that has more than like 1% of end users running a full node doesn't really sound realistic to me, right? You can make it as decentralized as possible, but I mean, how many people want to run essentially a server on their home computer, right? And I mean, people have given the analogy of like, you know, you can currently run your own email server on your home computer and not a single person does. And they're like, oh, well, that's not decentralized money. We're talking about something totally different. When it comes to money, people will want to do it. And it's like, I seriously doubt that people are going to want to do it. And in fact, I mean, an email server is far more lightweight than Bitcoin D, right? Um, so, you know, I just don't see people actually wanting to do that. And I mean, what I would kind of like to see, so what I do see as more plausible is I could see businesses wanting to run their own nodes. I could see, I mean, certainly this already happens today in businesses that are dealing with cryptocurrency. Most of them already are running their full nodes. But you know, in the future, where you know merchants are taking payments, I could see them running a full node. Probably more likely if there's one dominant cryptocurrency. I don't think they're going to want to run multiple full nodes if they're taking 10 different ones. Um, but I could see businesses wanting to run full nodes, exchanges, payment processors, these sorts of people. And I mean, one, they're going to have a little bit more money to run their full nodes than a normal person will, you know, cost wise. So we probably have a little bit of a cost buffer to play with in terms of how expensive can this get and it still be reasonable. But I do think that we want to keep it, so I don't think we want to be pushing out. So like if a small business, and most people in cryptocurrency today are small businesses. Most businesses are small businesses. I don't think we want to be pushing out small businesses, right? To the point where it's only like the big, super big corporations running the nodes. So I do think we need to work on keeping the cost down of running a node, but that doesn't necessarily imply, you know, using the block size to do it. It implies perpetual optimization, right? And so that's kind of the way I look at it. I mean, I'd like it to be the case that, you know, hobbyists and the 1% of end users who want to run their own full nodes can still afford to, but that doesn't strike me as like a super big priority.
Well, 1% is plenty at scale if
Yeah.
they're running full nodes, to be perfectly honest. Like if we get 1 billion people using a blockchain, having 1 million full nodes running is like totally awesome. Like that
Yeah.
is plenty. And I always think that there's going to be also other reasons that big businesses will want to run those full nodes. The truth is that they may have a network outage and still need access to blockchain data for auditing and accounting purposes. There are actual economic factors at play where they don't want to only rely on a third party. I think that, you know, you're always going to have kind of two tiers in a globally available, widely used blockchain. You're going to have your inner miner tier where hopefully there's as many miners in as many locations as possible, and that level of decentralization is really important. But then you're always going to have the economic actors running nodes, and those economic actors are kind of the gatekeepers. So I think that the narrative needed to kind of shift. Instead of saying end users need to run nodes, it should be, well, there should be enough non-mining nodes from economic players that care about the honesty of the network, right? If a company is using a blockchain and the miners start defrauding users, 51% attack or some other attack is taking place, well, those economic entities have every reason to like pause services and do all the things that they need to do to protect their customers. And if the miners know that that's their incentive, they're a lot less likely to try to do anything malicious. I don't think it needs to be an end user. It can be a company, it can be a small company. In fact, I would like it if regular people really aren't the ones managing it, because they don't have support SLAs, they don't have good network connections, they don't have good data centers. Like, everything works better if it's a slightly larger scale, like a slightly more expensive scale. Like, I have support agents that can go at a data center and reboot boxes, or making sure that connectivity is good. I'm going to get much better uptime guarantees. And there's hundreds of thousands of data centers in the world. If we could get to the point where there's nodes running in all of just the data centers, we're plenty decentralized. I don't need to be running it at my house anymore.
Right. Yeah, I'd like to see some numbers on how many people actually do, because I mean, I don't know how many thousand BTC nodes there are, but you know, how many of those are going to be businesses? How many of those are going to be miners and spy networks? And, you know, I mean, I run, I think 3 Bitcoin core nodes. You know, how many of those people that are actually individuals, you know, how many of them are running multiple for different reasons? I just don't think anybody does it at all, honestly. So like, why cater to people that honestly don't really exist? I don't need to run the nodes. I do it just, messing around with them. There's no reason to stop any scale for that.
Like, a natted node provides zero value, right? Like, if you're going to run your node behind a NAT, you might be the only consumer of your node. You provide zero SPV benefit. You provide literally no benefit to the network other than stealing people's bandwidth to get you blocks for something that you barely check. In fact, it hurts the network in that respect. What we really care about are nodes that have their ports open so that SPV connectivity is there. And there's business incentives for more of those nodes to be brought up if we hit scale. So say that I am BitPay, right? And I care about people making crypto purchases. And we on-ramp 1 billion people. And we notice that people's wallets are going slow, and there's not enough connectivity for SPV, and the network is deteriorating. Well, guess what? Those businesses that care about their profit on those chains, they're going to bring up more nodes. There's an economic incentive for them to bring up more nodes, because the nodes are providing a better user experience for the chain that is getting that economic activity. And I don't see a world where it's like, oh, well, nobody's going to run the nodes. No, absolutely they are. They care about their bottom line. They care about making money. And that should be the main motivation for any blockchain business. Is I'm not asking them to do this shit out of charity. They need to make money. And in order to make money, they need the infrastructure that supports their users, which then means that if we need more full nodes, that the businesses are going to step up and they're going to provide those full nodes for their own benefit. And they don't even need to give a shit about you. They care about their money.
Definitely. I totally agree. It's not really a problem that we should keep in the forefront of our minds.
No.
Actual usage definitely should be, but we're running on about like an hour and 45 minutes, I guess, here. So if y'all want us to kind of wrap it up and give any shout outs to any social media, your projects. I know that tons of people, are going to be interested as soon as it comes out. CashShuffle. I've already used the versions that are currently out. I love it. Can't wait till it's integrated into mobile wallets if possible, and a really good UI on the desktop, and as well as Open Bazaar. I haven't bought anything, but I've been on there.
The new multi-currency wallet's awesome, Chris. You guys did great work there. I finally got that installed today, a couple days ago, and really, you guys have come a long way on the Open Bazaar product. So
yeah, that was super difficult to handle all that. But yeah, I'm glad it's finally out the door. I was stressing out the last couple of weeks.
Fair enough. So I can give a quick CashShuffle update. So as many of the viewers probably know, we're in the middle of a security audit. We've hired Kudelski Security. They were recommended by Tim Ruffing, who wrote the original CoinShuffle paper, and they're doing a audit. We have meetings starting at the beginning of next week to kind of go over the scope of everything that they're going to be looking after. And the reason we're doing that is to make sure that we have libraries and specifications that are really ready for other mobile wallets to integrate. Electron Cash is going to be native with CashShuffle soon, and that'll all happen in the background. Needing an extra plugin will no longer be required. Any knowledge about, change addresses or amounts, all of that will be kind of just taken away from the user. You check a box, it'll shuffle in the background, and it'll prioritize spending shuffled UTXOs for you on the network. The libraries that we've done in Python are kind of self-encapsulated so that hopefully the porting effort to other languages works better. There's been serious interest from Bitcoin.com. We're hoping to be able to target that wallet specifically once this new release is done. And we will be publishing findings from the security report, everything that they found, as we really want to show that it's not just a small team of devs. We take this really seriously, and we're trying to bring out something that's really production ready for the entire community to use and integrate against, that is not a moving target. And we're really close, and the security audit, they said to give it a month, which is, on the long end. I think it ends up being, about 2 weeks worth of work that they predicted to do the audit. But we're giving it a month just to make sure that we can fix any issues that come back. And then there'll be multiple reports that are published. There'll be our internal report from the CashShuffle team, and Kudelski will also be putting a report on their blog and their website with their findings. And we're really, really excited that, after over a year of development, we're finally ready to ship this thing that started as just a small conversation between me and Jonald. It's really come a long way, and huge shout outs to Kalen and Mark Lunderberg and some of the other developers that stepped up. Imaginary username and checksum for a lot of the testing that they did. And we couldn't be more excited to be able to bring the solution to Bitcoin Cash.
Did Tim Ruffing do any review on it, like protocol wise or anything?
So he looked at it very briefly in like an early dev build, and it wasn't done. And he was like, this isn't done. It's like, look at our release notes. We know it's not done. We're not even claiming it's alpha yet. And then he's not a huge BCH proponent. We're friendlier on friendly terms with him now, but it's been very difficult for him to do the review himself. We've asked him multiple times. I'm hoping that he won't be able to resist looking at it once the security review is complete. Because if Kudelski puts out a report and we put out a report, I think that his curiosity will get the best of him and he'll be forced to look at the work that we've done. I hope that's what happens. But we have not been super lucky getting him to do it directly.
Right. All right. Well, thanks, Josh and Chris. That was awesome. It was a lot of time, so I really appreciate it. I know y'all are busy.
Yeah.
Well, it was a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah, definitely. Good to chat.